Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. BC here with a new episode of Oddcast, the podcast. Today, I am really excited to be able to sit down with my new friend, Bradely Grove Hyson. We're about to have a phenomenal conversation on elevating the dialogue for peace and using focus for our awakening. Bradely Grove Hyson is a teacher, speaker, author, organizer, and artist who has dedicated his life to building healthy, sustainable, peaceful communities throughout the world. Over 3 decades, he has appeared before thousands of people in a variety of settings and formats. He continues to lecture, present, coach, consult, and lead different courses, retreats, and workshops. He has authored Awakening 101 Foundations for a Healthy, Sustainable, Peaceful World, the Life is a Miracle children's book series, and founded Giant Smile Media, a production company that focuses attention on the transformation of individuals, organizations, and communities towards healthier, more sustainable systems and infrastructures all over the world. Bradely, it is truly a pleasure to sit down with you and have this conversation that we're about to share with people. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me.
The pleasure is all mine, Brian. Thank you for having me.
You have a beautiful setting there, and I'm really excited for the conversation that we're about to have, all the insights and wisdom and thoughts that we're going to be able to share with people. You and I have connected via Zoom a couple times, and I just, in the bottom of my heart, I just know that this is a divine and serendipitous relationship, and this is going to be a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
The pleasure is all mine. Thanks again, Brian.
Well, let's tell our listeners a little bit about you and how you've been able to do all of the things that you do. How did you arrive where you're at, and what's your background?
Oh boy. It's interesting when we try to sort of sum up who we are and tell our story in a very condensed and sort of bulleted form. I will tell you that, I'm one of 4 boys, and I have lived in a couple of different places in New York. I've lived outside of Schenectady, New York, which is where my dad is from. I was born in Niskayuna, and lived in Buffalo for 8 years, and then have lived in Clifton Park, which is also outside of Schenectady, and lived in Rhode Island. And my parents are in the house that I grew up in still for over 40 years in Rhode Island. I've lived in Massachusetts. I've lived in Vermont and Connecticut as well. And I can't discount the importance of my family in my life, and having 3 brothers, and also having a certain amount of financial stability and privilege to make things in my life possible that other people that are dealing with more primary needs don't have. I didn't have to deal with those sorts of things. I always knew that there would be a roof over my head and food and like that. So I've been very blessed, and I can't discount the importance of that in my life. Sports was a really big part of my youth. And I think there's a lot of lessons about health and wellness that have carried over with me. I was raised in a Catholic Protestant family and that sort of worldview and paradigm. But I think in retrospect, I always knew that there were questions that were not satisfied from that, from those traditions. So one of my first loves was music. And, I wanted to be a rock star for most of my life, and played in bands, and I've been a singer and a songwriter. And I've had a certain amount of success with that. But I think that the lessons in music from creating, flow, collaborating with others, have certainly served me well and are certainly relevant in my life today. I was just talking to a friend about how, if you'd asked me in my teens if my music career went the way that it did, I would have called it a disappointment, But that story about like the way to make God laugh is to sort of tell him your plans.
Right.
Yeah. So there was really a blessing for me, because what I didn't know when I was a teenager was the possibility of human transformation and inner healing and the gift of service those just weren't even in my worldview. So I think music was a bridge to teach me a bunch of different things, and it's still important in my life. But once I started to learn about the human potential movement and inner growth and transformation, like that was where the juice was for me, you know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, music sort of segued into, so I went to college. I wanted to go to college to sort of please my parents, and thought like, I'll do this just to please them because it was what was expected of me. But really my heart was in music. And in retrospect, that's another like Grace thing. My major was marketing with a minor in communications. And in retrospect in my life, it's really turned out to be a blessing, right? Because I feel like in a certain sense, I'm a salesman for peace. That's the product that I'm selling, or awakening, you know. But the distinctions I think were really useful in a very kind of I didn't really recognize it at the time, but in looking back at the thread of my life, that seems like a gift for me. So I graduated college in 1989, and two things that were on my mind at the time. I mean, in college, it became really clear to me that the people that were in business school with me were all about making money. And it was clear to me that my heart was about service. Do I have time to tell you sort of a little sort of story?
Absolutely. Please do. I love
We had to do
stories.
this exercise in like a business ethics class where they had 20 characteristics that you had to sort of rank in order of importance. One was like, you know, quality product, making a profit, like service to the community, these sorts of things. And we had to rank them individually and then come together as a class to rank them. And I remember thinking like the number one thing has to be like service to the community and like making a difference in these things. And the whole class was like uniform in like it's profit. And they were making
product or profit, like back and forth, right?
Yeah, and they were making jokes like go work for PBS or something like that. But it like intuitively I was just feeling like I was feeling not like that I hadn't found my home. I hadn't found my people. So, and right around the time of all the different ails that humanity was dealing with, in my mind, I was thinking that if we don't address the environmental one, we're not going to be able to address all the other things. And they're all important. They're all equally important. But that was my thinking at the time. And so my first, I'd say soul career choice, well, after music, was about being an environmental activist. And when I graduated, I did a lot of volunteer work for environmental organizations in Rhode Island, a community gardening organization, an organization called Keep Providence Beautiful. I started volunteering work for an organization called Save the Bay, which was the largest environmental organization. And while it Saved the Bay, I got hired as my first-time job. And I also met a woman who introduced me to, do you know the work of Landmark Education?
Oh, no, I haven't heard of that.
Well, it was one of the first transformational kind of experiences in my life that was proved to be very, that they're tools that I still use today. And I love that work. I haven't done it in a long time, but I really, really love it. You know, it's in the flavor of Tony Robbins or those sorts of things. But it was really the first serious way at looking at doing some inner growth, and also this idea of a created life. You know, I mean, you have to understand this is back in 1989. So a lot of stuff that's popular culture or just taken for granted just wasn't around. This is like pre-cell phone, pre-internet, sort of all this stuff, or it wasn't, you know, things in my life.
And it was almost personal growth even. It was like the dawn of that era where people actually realize that they can be something more and self-actualized, and you know.
Yeah, and if you look, a lot of this stuff is even going around in the 70s, you know. You know, it's I think once you do some of this work, you assume everybody knows this stuff, but it's really interesting to go out into the world and to see how different people are and all the different worldviews and whatnot. But this was one of my first senses of real empowerment, and it's where I birthed the idea to start this nonprofit organization that would be the next major segment of my life, called the Apron Institute for Sustainable Living. And we started at this organization, Save the Bay, in meetings in people's living rooms, because I found out about these houses that were made from discarded automobile tires called earthships that could stay between 50 and 60 degrees year round with no external heat sources because of the ways that they were designed. They were generating all their own energy. They were treating all their own waste. They were, super ecologically efficient. And we started out to try and build one of those in Rhode Island. And the organization didn't actually build an earthship, but we built a building that was a hybrid of over 50 different ecologically friendly systems, technologies, and products with information exhibits that explained all of them. Passive solar, a greenhouse, super insulated walls, recycled roofing material, composting toilets, solar electric, solar hot water, low VOC paints, edible landscapes like that. And we started off by doing a lot of education programs and workshops. And our mission very quickly evolved because we found that sustainability principles were not relevant only for buildings, but they were relevant to everything. And that's really been my dream. When I was in Rhode Island, our goal was to make Rhode Island the nation's first sustainable state. And in addition to education programs and workshops and running this center, it was on a 50-acre piece of land where this house was, and we had nature trails and we do workshops. We started a whole Sustainable Rhode Island initiative, which was a statewide coalition of, I forget how many I think we had like dozens of organizations and state agencies and NGOs that were working with us. And we also started to do an annual Sustainable Living Festival and Clean Energy Expo. We did that for 10 years, and we had some great artists, Dar Williams, John Schofield, Crooked Still, the Grand Slambovians, great musicians and, workshops and vendors and kids activities. And we had solar car races and sort of all these things. And by the time I left, we were starting to do consulting and policy work with state agencies, with the legislature, with the governor's office, with federal Congress people and senators, and working on policies. And I think we started in my parents' basement with a $600 a year budget, and we left with $1 million a year. When I left, we had $1 million a year budget and about 15 employees that were working with us. And the other thing that was really significant in my life at the time was that I got a fellowship to travel the world and visit eco-villages and co-housing communities all over the world. I went to India, I went to Italy, I went to British Columbia in Canada, I went to 7 US states. And they bought me a laptop, and they bought me a camera, and I got to meet the people and video them and document them. And what I learned there has really informed my work moving forward. And a lot of that is represented in my book. So I would say that 15-year period of running that organization is a big, in terms of my outer work, that's a big part of my outer work. I will tell you that what was going on all along then is I'm still, I learned meditation, and I've been doing meditation for 30 years, and I was still doing work with Landmark and reading books and, continuing my own inner growth path. I was dealing with health stuff. And then, so I left that organization, and the last, I'd say 10, 12 years have been starting this next chapter of my life as a teacher and a speaker, as a workshop leader. I have spent longer than I thought or could imagine writing these 2 books, Awakening 101, Foundations for a Healthy, Sustainable, Peaceful World. It's 487 pages with over 350 different references. And from my mind, it lays out the case for why we have the people, the resources, and the technologies to ensure a basic standard of living for every human being alive on planet Earth. And I fully believe that we have the resources to do that. And the book makes a case as for why that is. As an efficiency and sustainability expert who's seen, the promised land of sustainable community development, when I go into most of suburban America and most of America, it just breaks my heart, the waste and inefficiencies. It's like crazy town. We're letting fruit wither away on the vine because because we don't shut off the lights or because we overpave things that we don't need to overpave, or because we put, lawns that we have to pump carbon to maintain instead of having local food systems, and on and on. So my work post this nonprofit that I started, is really just to say, like, what's next for me. And I will tell you that I'm also learning the new lay of the land. It seems like everything has changed now, right? With smartphones and with the internet and with YouTube and video, and the whole media front has just changed completely. And I think
changing daily.
Yeah, and I think we can't also diminish how much we've changed. We're not the same people right now. And something as simple as, I'm still amazed at the ways that people communicate with like a smartphone. For all the things that I would just pick up the phone and talk to somebody's like, no, I'll text you and we'll have a text conversation. And I'm old school in that respect. But
or Zoom call or live streaming or what we're doing right now.
Yeah, this wasn't even a thing when I started my activist work.
I love what you said earlier about being a salesman for peace and awakening. That's super resonates with me. That I love that. I'm really excited to know more about your book. It sounds like a manifesto for hope, really, to give an example of what's possible for mankind and to make a case for the fact that we are in the best situation at the best time and the best people to actually achieve something greater as a society, as humankind. Would you like to expand a little bit on that philosophy, that principle? Because I think that ties in with the overarching theme of our conversation today.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you and I are both hip to the notion of we can create. Like, we are creators. It's one of the sacred gifts we've been given, is that we have the ability to create virtually anything that we focus our attention on. And in my mind, I can't think, if we can create anything, like, where are the limits end, So if we can create anything, why not create a world that works for everyone? Why don't we not create a world that is peaceful?
A world that's empowered.
Yeah, a world that's empowered, a world that's peaceful, a world that my life's mission statement is about creating heaven on earth, and I really do think we live in heaven, save for our own ignorance, our own unawareness, our own mindsets that have us miss the profound magic that is life and existence at every given moment. There's so much going on. There's so much. A teacher that I love, Sadhguru, always says there's so much life going on at every given moment. And it really is a miracle. I mean, just the functioning of our eyes, or, I mean, all that went into the language that we're using right now, or the technology that we have right now. Life is just incredible. And I think some of the work of awakening is about realizing that,
So why are we the best people at the best time with the best opportunity to actually achieve that awakening? What are some of the advantages that we have in this current moment, despite the economic and social strife and all the division that we face in culture today? Why are we at the best point in human history thus far to actually achieve this awakening?
Well, every generation stands on the shoulders of all of the evolutionary advances of all their previous generations. So more people are living higher quality lives than at any time in human history. And I know there are problems, a lot of different problems. And I feel like sometimes when I say that, my friends get very defensive because they feel like somehow that invalidates all those that are suffering with, poverty and racial injustice and ecological stuff. And I'm not saying that we don't have work to do, right? But I'm also saying that more people are alive and living a higher standard of living than at any time in human history. I mean, I was just saying, a smartphone and a supermarket, those are things that were not around for most of human history, So the fact that we can communicate and get an idea around the world with a snap of a fingers, that's a miracle. That wasn't we were in days of where, first of all, you couldn't get around the world was for most of human history. And then for much of it, it was going to take, ink on a piece of paper or a courier that was going to have to get on a ship. So, if they made it to the other part of the world, it was so the fact that we can communicate so quickly means that I think our evolution is happening in an accelerated rate. And I think that's actually one of the things that's causing so much of the dissonance that's going on right now, right? Because it's a little destabilizing, the pace of things changing, I'm finding
we also have the whole of all accumulated knowledge at the touch of our fingertips. We can find out anything that's ever been discovered, any thought that's ever been created, any idea that's ever been proliferated. We have all of the information at the touch of a button all of the time now. I also love, one of the things that I've been saying for a long time now is that I love the fact that technology is beginning to catch up to spirituality. For the longest time, when people were talking about, oh, I see auras and I can meditate and I can feel how other people are feeling and I'm an empath. For the longest time, when somebody would have they would make a statement like that, either it would resonate with somebody or they would be shunned. For the longest time, people thought that was woo-woo and esoteric, and you would be put into this one camp that, this wasn't somebody that I could listen to. And now we have the technology to justify and verify a lot of the things that people have been proclaiming throughout religions and in human history, like the work they're doing over at Heart Math. I just read an article that they now have video cameras that can tape and see the electromagnetic field that emanates and radiates from our hearts. They can actually videotape and see the torus, that big donut shaped thing, the electromagnetic field that emanates directly from our heart center in a 6 to 10 foot diameter. And they can also see and videotape how those two electromagnetic fields interact with each other when they come into close proximity. They also did a study, which was super fascinating. I don't know if you've heard of it. They did a study where they took 50 people, they put these little sweat pads under their armpits, and they took these 50 people up into an airplane and had them skydive for the very first time. And then they collected those sweat pads, and they took another 50 people and put them on, or they took those same 50 people, put new sweat pads on them, and had them run on a treadmill for 15 or 20 minutes and collected the sweat from that. So now they have two different sets of pads from each individual person. Then they took a new set of 50 people and hooked them up to fMRI brain scanners. And they had them smell the pads of the people when they were on the treadmill. And they had them smell the pads of the people when they were skydiving. And the amygdalas in the brains fired with the same fear pattern that they had when they jumped out of the airplane, as if it were them about to have the experience.
Just from smelling the armpit sweat of the skydivers.
Indicating that we can literally smell the pheromones of fear that other people put off. And for me, that indicates, if we can smell and my brain reacts, my brain fires with the same chemistry and has the same reaction as if I'm about to jump out of a plane. If I can smell somebody else's fear and have that same visceral reaction within my body system, what other emotions can we smell? What other feelings are we privy to that affect us, that we are picking up from other people that we're simply not aware of? If we can smell fear, we can smell love. If your fear affects my brain, your love affects my brain. Your joy, your fear, your anger, your happiness, your sadness, your sorrow, all of those things are affecting us. And we can feel how that another person's energetic field, their electromagnetic field, affects us. We can see that now. It's really a fascinating and exciting time to be alive.
Aho.
One of the things that you talked about in your speech was the power of focus and attention to create almost anything that we want in life. How can we use this understanding and awareness to create peace?
Well, everything that every creation began with a thought or began with an idea. If you want to learn a sport, you have to first of all choose what sport. If you want to learn an instrument, you have to pick which instrument. So if we want to have a peaceful world, a healthy, sustainable, peaceful world, or a healthy, regenerative, peaceful world, we have to start talking about it. We have to, first of all, be clear in our mind. That's what we want. I've been doing a lot of coaching for the last couple of years. And with my clients, I always invite them to begin with the end in mind and to talk about what would success look like? What's the end zone for you? And I think what the end zone for humanity is healthy, sustainable, peaceful communities.
So I think that we all talk about peace, and I think that most of us in society desire this, but I don't feel like we're necessarily getting closer to it. So what are we focusing on that's moving us further away from that objective rather than closer to it? What's the shift that we need to make?
Well, respectfully, there's two things that I want to say. And the first one is that I don't think most people do talk about wanting to have a healthy, sustainable, peaceful world. And I was talking to a young girl that I met this summer who was in college, who told me, I said, "What are you studying?" And she said, "I'm in peace studies." And I said, "That's great. That's like fantastic." And she said, "That's not usually the response that people sort of give to me." And it occurred to me that I think that there is a very negative connotation that a lot of people have associated with peace. I think it's sort of like a hippy-dippy kind of 60s residue of it. And in my book, there's a line on the introduction page that says, peace is no longer a hippy-dippy, naive, utopian fantasy. It's the most efficient, economical, and intelligent path forward. I think that a bridge that I see so first of all, I don't think that we are talking about it in a focused, serious way that we focus on other things, like American Idol or the Super Bowl or, and frankly, the Super Bowl is a much bigger event in the world than World Peace Day, than Global World Peace Day, and I've had conversations with people talking about peace who say you're never going to have peace. Like it's a fact of human life. You're always going to have war. You're always going to have conflict. I hear that all the time. The second thing that I would say is that, so I think part of my vision with starting this media company is to create a safe space for people to come out of the closet and say, I'm an advocate for peace. And here's why. I think that there is a lack of integrity between the words that we say and the ways that we are living our lives and designing our communities. And my book really talks about awakening is an inner process, and healthy, sustainable, peaceful communities, healthy, regenerative communities is the outer manifestation of peace. And I just see all over the world, the average size of buildings has doubled in the United States since the 1950s, which means more resources to build these larger houses and then heat them. We overpave so much of things that we don't need to at our own peril. Our diets have a huge impact in being expressions of peace, and having lower carbon footprint and lower health instances. And there's countless ways in which we treat one another. And I'm not even talking about the things we can all agree upon, the mass shootings and those sorts of things in the world. I mean, I've seen unloving behaviors by family members, by neighbors, by strangers in different places. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that are in a lot of pain and don't even know they're in pain, or don't even have any access to affecting it or transforming it. And peace begins with us, right? It begins with a flowering of our hearts and an awakening of us and sort of a consciousness. So you can't be peaceful if you don't have the tools to do it, right? So if you're coming under
peace, if you're not at peace.
Yeah. So I think that I think that we have a lot of work to do, right? I think that there's there's a lot of trauma that's happened in human history, and it's passed on. Traumatized parents pass those wounds on to their children, and traumatized communities pass those traumas on to the residents and nations too.
Intergenerational transference thing.
Yeah, that's the concept of epigenetics. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, inheritance. Yeah, so there's that, and I just think that there's a lot of stuff still in our modern world with 100,000 different chemicals, and like I said, Wi-Fi and 5G and satellite communications, that like we're still adjusting to this big spike in our evolutionary trajectory, which I think when we were living much more earth-based, earth-connected lives was a more gradual evolution. And then I think in the last century or so, we've really shot up in a crazy way. I mean, I frankly think when we started exploding atomic weapons and doing nuclear testing, that's all in our biosphere. Like the residue of that is going to linger because we know it's a biosphere, right? It's a closed biosphere. So I think we said earlier, we've learned so much and we're standing on the shoulders of so much, but despite all of that, you and I still know, comparatively speaking, we just know nothing. We just don't know anything.
I know
in the big picture of things.
There was a story, I can't remember, it was some well-known mathematician, and he was talking about, what I learned in Calculus 101? I learned how much I don't know about calculus.
Exactly.
I think that it's really important to go back to how important inner peace is, and spreading the message and sharing the message that we can't be an advocate for peace and we can't cultivate peace without having peace. I remember I was in a Buddhist monastery. I spent 4 days in Vietnam in a place called Tien Vien Truc Lam Bac Ma, and got to live. It was on an island in the middle of a lake, like an hour and a half up in the mountains in Vietnam.
Who was the leader of that Sangha?
I don't remember.
Okay.
The head abbot at the time. He told me it was in Vietnamese and I didn't retain it. I can't remember the head abbot. Okay. But I do remember it was the most beautiful place that I had ever seen. Literally a 450-year-old Buddhist monastery built on an island in the middle of this remote crystal blue lake. It was tranquil, serene, absolutely gorgeous. And I felt so uncomfortable there. So far outside of my comfort zone. I'm only 5'10" on a good day, depending on what shoes I'm wearing. So I'm like 4 inches taller than everybody there. I'm the only one with hair. I'm super white. They're all wearing brown robes and I'm wearing blue robes. And I felt extremely out of place. I felt judged. And on the after the fourth day, the head abbot calls me in to have a conversation. And through the help of a translator, I share with him this story. He asked, "How are you doing?" I said, "I'm struggling. I'm in the most beautiful, peaceful place that I've ever seen in my entire life. And I don't feel peaceful. I feel chaos and I don't feel comfortable." And his answer to me was, "Peace comes from within. You can be peaceful anywhere." And my immediate thought was, "You don't understand. I'm 10 months into this journey where at best I'm a unicorn because I'm the only Caucasian person in this community. And at worst, I'm hated for being in the wrong place with the wrong color. And I'm 4 inches taller than everybody here. I don't belong. You don't understand what it's like." And then I went home and I meditated and I asked myself, okay, he's the abbot. He probably has some wisdom. What's the truth to this? And the truth was, I wasn't at peace because I didn't feel like I felt accepted. I wasn't at peace because I didn't feel like I fit in. I wasn't at peace because I had my own projections and my own filters of the reality that surrounded me. I chose, because of those projections, to not be at peace in the most beautiful, peaceful place perhaps on the planet. And that perspective affected everything. And I think that that translates so deeply to all that we're experiencing in this moment. I remember there's one motivational speaker, a mentor of mine, Jim Rohn, once said that our lives are affected predominantly by the way we think things are, not by the way things are. The way we think things are affects us most. Would you please expand on the value and the perspective of inner peace and our own paradigms and filters that we put reality through?
I know that you know as a Buddhist that the notion of duality. So the second that we call something good, bad exists. And I think there's nothing in the world that you can look at that doesn't have, I call it D1 and D2, the glass half full, half empty. That's any modality, that's any teacher, that's any discipline. That's like, so, and the value of focus is about putting our attention on the thing that we want to amplify and grow. There's a Native American story about a wise grandfather who tells his grandchild about the two wolves. You know that story?
Yeah, where, keep telling it for the rest of the audience that might not have heard it.
That grandfather says to his grandson, there are these two wolves. One is love and peace and courage and compassion, and the other one is fear and anger and hatred and jealousy, and they're always sort of fighting with one another. And the grandson says, well, which one wins, Grandpa? And the grandfather says, whichever one we focus our attention on.
Whichever one we feed.
Whichever one we feed. Thank you. So so focus is everything. But I also think as a spiritual person, as a yogi and as a sincere seeker, I've made peace with the fact that every day of my life is about sadhana. Every day of my life is about spiritual practice. Every day in my life is about doing that which we ought and avoiding that which we should not. And it's not like, I think people are looking for a pill that they can take or a book that they can read or a thing that it's like your life is suddenly like never ending problems. And I have a teacher who said, as we awaken, it's not that we don't get lost from time to time, it's that the recovery time gets shorter and shorter and shorter. But we have to take care of ourselves every single day. I mean, it doesn't matter what you ate last month, or it doesn't matter if you had good sleep the week before. It doesn't matter if you exercised 6 years ago. It doesn't matter if you've been like we need to be cultivating ourselves every day and our practice every day. And if there were a lesson that I would want to teach young people, it's to how to access a sense of inner peace and how to cultivate lifelong habits that will allow that to grow and expand and flourish. It's never a one and done, it's always about ongoing maintenance. And there are so many different layers to things. I mean, service is a part of it, like right livelihood is a part of it, right relationships is a part of it, diet is a part of it, exercise and activity is a part of it, rest is a part of it. I think we should all be meditating in some form or another. Because we have to take care of the body. We know this. And meditation is the single greatest tool that I know of to take care of the mind. And that's equally important. Forest and nature bathing is we should all be spending regular time, daily, weekly, in nature environments. So important, And I think nowadays, what we also have to be mindful of is less screen time and having real boundaries amongst it. I've read that screen time is the #1 addiction for young people. So the new generation has to now deal with screen time. And I'm sad to say that I think people are going to have to, especially with the pandemic, I think people have to learn how to be with one another. I don't mean on a screen. Yeah, with themselves, but also to be with another human being, and how to sit and talk and not always have to have an electronic thing going on. I think we're so used to instant gratification, and I think we're so used to a level of customization that is just unprecedented, like people, a family in a home, all watching whatever they want to watch and listening to their own thing and making their own dinner. And you go into a supermarket and you have not just 3 choices of what to drink, you have 300 choices, 7 different kinds of colas and 8 different forms of apple juice. And like, it's just, I don't think that's always in our best interest, right?
Well, there's a really great TED talk called The Paradox of Choice that illustrates how our happiness inversely correlates to the amount of choice that's available to us. And the example that he used was, he was in his 60s. And back when he was younger, when he would go to a store to buy a pair of jeans, he would go to Sears and they would have 4 pairs of jeans. And he would choose the pair that closely fit, the best that it could. And if he got home and he didn't absolutely love the jeans, he had somebody to blame, so to speak. There was some other reason besides himself. Nowadays, you go to the Gap and there's 200 pairs of jeans. And if you go home and you're not elated with the choice that you have, you're not absolutely ecstatic with the jeans and the way they fit and the way they feel and the way your butt looks, then who do you have to blame? You. You can only delineate that with so many choices. If I'm not ecstatic with my choice, by the end of the day, there's only one person at fault. It's me, which puts blame and shame and guilt on us for not being happy, which perpetuates that cycle. And the ability to be happy inversely correlates with the amount of choice that's available to us. I also liked what you were talking about earlier and how we are so fragmented nowadays. You're talking about, the screens and the technology and the cell phones and computers and all this stuff vying for our attention. And I don't think that it has to be mutually exclusive. I feel like we can coexist with all that is available to us, the Facebook, the screens, the Netflix, all of the stuff that is there. The problem is, I feel like, and I'll use me as an example. I was telling you when we were talking on the phone when we very first met, there was a time where I would meditate at least once a day for half an hour to 45 minutes, usually 2 or 3 times a day for 45 minutes to an hour. Now that I've been back stateside for a couple years, I've let go of that practice. And now I'm lucky if I meditate once every week or once every other couple of weeks. The problem is that I've decided not to make that a priority. Technology in and of itself, the existence of all the technology and all the things vying for my attention isn't the inherent problem. The inherent problem is my ability to prioritize my spiritual well-being.
Yeah. Well, I hope you'll prioritize your spiritual well-being
The
from this
nice
call
thing
on.
is that when I do it, I realize how much I've missed it. Like, I
Yeah.
meditated for 15 minutes prior to our conversation here because I wanted to make sure that I was centered and grounded and that the best word, my most authentic self could show up for this conversation. And every time I do it, I realize how much I miss it. So that's a really good thing.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Well, you also talked about human nature and the paradigm that old, like, you remember Popeye?
Sure.
In Popeye, he used to say, "I is what I is, and that's all that I is." And this human paradigm that we can never change, and it's human nature, and this belief that things are the way that they are, and people react the way they react, and it's just part of our innate character, our innate quality. And I feel like that is a big, not only fallacy, but a big hindrance and alibis us away from showing up as our authentic self. Could you expand on that? Because you talked a fair amount about it in your presentation, the speech that I wrote, human nature and this belief that we can't be better than what we are.
Ask the question again. Like what?
Can you expand a little bit on your philosophy on how the paradigm of human nature and not being able to grow beyond who we think we are keeps us stuck, keeps us away from our evolving and our awakening.
You know, one of the things that I remember learning a while ago was that language represents phenomena in life, but it's not the same thing as the phenomena. It's like a guidepost. So the truth of life is beyond words. Like language is just like, from that level, like all of our words are just bullshit in a certain sense, because it's not the truth about life, which is far more mysterious, far more complex than any of us can ever understand. And I think we talked about this earlier. You know, it's like Anais Nin says, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. Do you know? Yes. So whatever. I've gone into houses that people say, like, I don't want to sort of give away her name, but I've been in a house that somebody said, what a beautiful, amazing house that they have, right? That's her paradigm. It fits that idea of what a nice house is. And in my mind, it's big, it's gaudy, it's like filled with all sorts of synthetic and toxic stuff. And it's like, you know, that's not my dream house, you know? So, I mean, how we see and how we perceive things is everything, right? So the person who thinks I am an empowered individual, I'm going to make a difference in the world, I'm going to serve, I'm going to find my unique gifts and share those with the world, is going to be a very different vibrational quality than the one who says, I'm worthless. I have nothing to contribute. I don't make any difference. You know, I'm a jerk, or like whatever, you know, whatever disempowered things. So the conversations that we have about ourselves and everybody else in our lives, and the conversations about every other person in our lives, has a difference in the quantum energetic seas of creation, you know? And if it's all just energy, there's the possibility that we never know where the ripples of any thought or any action will end, right? It's an energetic sea of creation. So being rooted in our higher self, capital S, or being awake, or being loving, or being peaceful, will shape everything that we do. A big lesson for me, and I tell my clients this all the time, is that when you're making a big decision or you need to do really important creative work, first and most important thing is to get into a good state first. If you're suffering, if you're in stress, if you feel doubt, terrible time to make major decisions, right? Sometimes we have to anyways, but the ideal thing, if you want to really get to that peaceful place, you have to find that place to sort of drop into peace within yourself. Yeah. I'm sorry, were you signaling me?
Centering. I was indicating centering, grounding and centering, and making sure you're in alignment with your highest authentic self.
But I think that these limitations, if you will, mind as something that can open up possibility or close it down, that's invisible to most human beings on planet Earth. I hope more people are getting hip to it, but even if you have that insight at some time, I think it's likely that you will forget it many times over the course of a day. Maybe you don't sleep so well, you start to see the world through like nothing ever works out for me. Maybe you have some bad news or a series of things, or you go through a health challenge, or you have some loss or something like that. That's where some of the opportunities for real growth comes, because it's like, how do we respond to this challenge? Are we like, you telling me your life story, you could have taken tragedy and used it as an excuse to sort of finish out your life in fairly short order, or go down a very downward spiral. But instead you used it as compost and raw material to have a miracle happen, to have a rebirth, you know, sort of a spiritual awakening, and become an extraordinary person. And that's everything, right? We could look at the political division as the beginning of the end, or an opportunity for us to have a real growth. We could look at COVID in the same way, you know? So like, life is what we make it. and it ain't over till it's over. So at every point in our life, we have an opportunity to make with our life something that we want or not. There was a woman named Lorraine Tisdale who, when I was in the environmental community in Rhode Island, there was a statewide umbrella organization called the Environment Council of Rhode Island, and it was all the different enviros would get together once a month, and we'd collaborate on different, policy issues, and we did a whole bunch of things. But this woman, Lorraine Tisdale, was like in her mid to upper 80s, and she's at every meeting, and she's community gardening, and she's active, and she's volunteering her work. She didn't say, I'm 86, my life is done making a difference. No, she showed up. And she did more than people that I know in their 20s or 30s who I don't know have ever had the privilege of service or activism or whatnot. So it's not about age. It's definitely not about money. I mean, these things make a difference. It's like every one of us has a choice on some level. And truly somebody who's had good teachers, who has blessings in life that make it easier, more likely to understand this knowledge or to put it into practice or to live a life of their dreams. It's easier for them than somebody who's had a lot of heartbreak and a lot of tragedy, and maybe they come from abuse, or maybe they don't even know their parents or whatnot. So we don't all start off with equal means, I say. Like different people have to go through different starts, but from every how many millionaires were once homeless or imprisoned or whatnot. So life is what we make it. That though.
Absolutely. You're familiar with Napoleon Hill?
Sure.
And Napoleon Hill talks about, within every setback or difficulty lies a seed of equal or greater success.
Yeah.
And the outcome, whether it ends up being favorable or unfavorable, is determined by how we use that opportunity and our mindset as we're going through it. The theory of post-traumatic growth versus post-traumatic stress, our ability to take the experience, to learn the lesson, and to view it as an opportunity rather than a setback, and to learn the lessons that will help us catapult up to a higher rung, to take what we've learned from that experience and find a way to utilize it to help other people, take that experience to find a way to help us grow and navigate in a more healthy and stronger fashion.
Yeah. I struggled for a bunch of my life. I've actually had a reoccurrence of it, but with eczema. I'm one of 32 million people in this country who have eczema. And it sucks when you're going through it, like the red, itchy, scaly sort of stuff. But I in my 20s, I got rid of all of the corticosteroid creams that the medical establishment sort of gives you, and I wanted to cure it naturally. And I can say unequivocally what a blessing it was, because it forced me, it caused me to learn all sorts of things about health and wellness and diet and nutrition, and learn things that have served me well in life that I never would have learned had I not come into it. The guy the best man at my wedding, similarly, he was diagnosed with cancer, and his wife became a leading vegan Whole Foods cook, and he's alive and beat it. But we can take these things and use them for growth, or we can take them and have a story about why life never turns out for me. And I feel like one of the questions that you asked in when we were talking earlier was about like what is the sort of one of the lessons that sort of sums up like what your message is for the world. And I have like so many, but one of them is like I will quote Steve Carell from The Office, or Michael Scott from The Office, about like never giving up, right? Like every day we got to try again. Every day we got to dust ourselves off, pick ourselves up, and just keep going. Like, because isn't that the way to go through life? Like just keep like playful out until whatever change happens when we change at the
There
end.
was another author, I can't remember who it was, that said the only comparison we should ever make in our lives is to who we were yesterday.
Yeah.
Trying to show up as a better version of ourselves than the person that we showed up as yesterday.
Yeah. And I think
comparing tends to hold us back from happiness and growth. And that's a big Buddhist fundamental principle in judgment and comparison leads to attachment and expectation. So
Yeah, and I was
everything you
just
have to say.
a friend of mine just reminded me about something that I was going through personally about not comparing just a few days ago. I think it's important for people that are committed to quality and ongoing growth and development also to have compassion, because people who want to do a lot, you know, I'm a student of nature, and there's a reason why the rose bush is dormant, 11 months of the year or 9 months of the year before it has these incredible blossoms. And I think many think that they can just keep going, doing. I think a lot of people use other things to as a bridge to push beyond when they're tired or whatever. So I think balance is really, really important, so that we can, so that we can sustain it and so that we can replenish ourselves. My Maharishi always talks about activity and rest. We need both those things. It's not just activity, 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 activity.
Yeah, I'm reading Everyday Hero by Robin Sharma, and he talks about, taking, like, booking out blocks of time for naps and rejuvenation and play and things like that. And going back to
Yeah,
what we were talking about earlier, like blocking out segments of time to go nature bathe and meditate and do the things that help ground and center us and help
and I think
reconnect us with our higher selves.
and I think there's a growing body of evidence that really suggests that's what the most effective and most successful people do, right? I think that taking that time for vacation, for personal growth, for meditation or sadhana, has us be more effective and make better decisions. When we don't tend to those things, then sometimes the body has a way of, like, if you don't get the message, sometimes the body has a way of saying, I'm going to let you, I'm going to sort of impose myself right now. And a health problem comes out that sort of sidelines you and forces you if you don't take the time that you need, or something else fails. So yeah, we have to, I say in my book that we have to be lifelong. The process of awakening is about being lifelong students at reading the tea leaves of our being, and these things are not separate, but mind, emotion, and our body, they all need to be tended to ongoingly, right? And our body needs food and replenishment. I think we need to get regular checkups in the modern age that we have. We need to be able to, sometimes we need extra protein, sometimes we need extra salad, sometimes we need to fast. um, for people that want to be happy and positive all the time, sometimes we need to grieve, or sometimes we need to feel, the shadow emotions. And I think sometimes we skimp on that because we want to gloss over those feelings to get into the more happy, positive state. So, but it's like when we experience tragedy, the research that I'm seeing shows one of the best things we can do is authentically feel our feelings and feel our emotions. And I think especially men are not good at that, right? We come from a whole culture about what it is to be macho and strong, and so I think we're, what it is to be a wise, awake, compassionate man is. I think those things have changed a lot, though. I think it's very different than it was, when I was growing up. Certainly, I think there's a lot
It's
more space.
definitely becoming a little bit more socially accepted.
Yeah,
There's a
and I think
lot
that's a
more
great thing.
validation and approval when a man does show his authentic emotion, particularly when that emotion isn't anger. That's still one that is kind of socially shunned. It's
Yeah,
not as socially acceptable, but that's also primarily due to the fact that often when men show anger, we don't do it in an appropriate way at an appropriate time towards the correct person. So
yeah.
that's understandable as well. Um, I think ultimately it all comes back to our ability to be centered and be grounded and be at peace with ourselves. It's really fascinating and interesting to me to watch some of the most ardent advocates for peace who seem to be so at dis-ease and so unpeaceful, and the belief that the only way to achieve what they want is to force and control and manipulate that way?
Well, I feel humbled as I get older. I think you said this earlier about how once you start to know something, you realize how little you know. My Tai Chi teacher said you have to practice 10 years before you can become a beginner. So, I mean, we all have work to do. And sometimes, especially once we think we know something, then our ego can get in the way.
Right.
And I did a lot of spiritual growth and a lot of courses during a part of my life, and I feel like I've done a lot less of it lately. And for me, I'm realizing it would be good for me to go back and to take a course or to take that time for myself. I think I've, like the camel, sort of tanks up on things and then goes out to be active in the world. And I have things that I do regularly, but there's nothing like, taking a new course or learning a new technique or bringing in a whole new element of knowledge into things. But when the ego gets in a way and we think I've read this and I've done these things, so it's so ongoing growth and development is wonderful. I've been saying one of the things in the pandemic that I wanted to learn is a new language, so that's one of the things that I want to do. And there's instruments that I want to learn. I play the guitar, but I'd like to learn other instruments. And I think it's always good to be growing and developing and doing new things. And there are old lessons, teachers or things that I want to be reminded of. And part of what I work with my clients is about creating mechanisms to make sure that we do take care of those things that we know are important. When we're in our grounded state, we know there are things that we should be doing, but do we have systems to make sure that we follow through with them on a regular basis? The modern world too is we're juggling multiple plates. That the circus guy who gets these plates going on top of sticks, and you get 3 of them are okay, and then these 2 start to wobble, and you tend to those, and the others. That's life right now. Health, finances, relationships, home, career, global events, and on and on and on. So many things to deal with. And you and I discovered today, technology. That's a whole nother one, right?
Well, we're learning. I think the growth thing is really important too, because that's a fundamental principle in nature, right? That if we're not growing, we're dying. So making sure that we're continuously growing, continuously adding to our foundation, making sure that our tap roots are going deeper and deeper, and we're discovering more and more of our potential, learning new things and growing in that manner it's just a fact of nature. And that's what helps a person to get to 86 years old and continue to be out there thriving and doing good things in their community.
Yeah.
As we're about to wrap up here, because we just crossed over the 1 hour mark, you said that you have a great deal of little bits of insight and pieces of wisdom that you would like to share. As we're closing up here, what is one valuable idea or insight that you would like to offer our listeners today that you think could help make a difference in their lives?
Well, I'd say 2 very brief things are: get some support. I think get a good teacher or teachers, and learn from the best people you can, the people you feel like have a good understanding, and model the types of behaviors and model the type of person that you want to be, and find out everything that you can from them. I also say create a life management system. And that's one of the things that I help my clients to do. Don't leave things to chance. And there are simple techniques that can really help people to get on top of their life, so that, Stephen Covey always talks about, you want to avoid the breakdowns quadrant. And there are life management things to make sure that bills get paid on time, that you don't drop the ball with different things. And when we have things managed in a reliable way, we can do more. When we're organized and efficient and we're not cleaning up messes that take 10 times the amount of effort as having done something right the first time, we can get a lot more done. And I imagine a lot of your audience are people that want to affect important global issues, poverty, social justice, hunger, ecological things, animal rights. So So, we have to get our lives together, and we have to get ourself together, but it begins with it's a vision. I also want to say that I do think we can create and be anything that we want to dream, be, or do. So never give up.
I am a great example of that. My
Yes,
life,
you are.
living legacy of one's ability to be more than what they thought they could be. I would also like to expand on the value of having a system, because when you have a system in place, you don't have to allocate 80% of your RAM thinking about all the things that you have to do. If you're walking around all day and part of your brain is thinking about, oh, I got to pay this bill, and I got to call this person, I got to send this email, and I got to pick up the kids, and if you have a system in place that makes it easier to manage your life, then you could be more present, and you can be more connected to yourself, and you can show up as a higher version of you. So it's a really valuable idea to have that life management system.
Can I say one more thing?
Of course you may.
I also think that having some sort of technique, so I've been doing transcendental meditation for 30 years. I think discovering what that thing is that gets you into a state of oneness, or a state of, being rooted, or a state of centeredness, you reliably having avenues to that, I think, is really essential. And my experience is that most people do not have that in their life. They don't even know how to get there. And so for a lot of people, it relies on drugs or some sort of pharmaceutical. But if there's a way in which you can access that kind of quiet, that kind of stillness, that kind of inner peace that doesn't involve an outside input, it's far, far better. So I can't stress the importance of it enough. And as I start to see all the research about how it helps, the David Lynch Foundation, which works at teaching transcendental meditation to PTSD and trauma victims, to war veterans, to healthcare providers in stressful situations, to at-risk youth. I mean, overwhelmingly, it's just important. So I think whether it's going into nature, or if it's being an artist helps you to be centered, or if it's if it's sports or athletics gets you into that sort of Zen state, but find a way to access your joy in a reliable state, and make sure that you've got, and it's fine to have multiple tools, but I think everyone should have a series of tools in their tool belt that they can pull out when stuff happens. And I think having friends and a community of support is equally important, right? So, and there are things that one can do if one feels alone in the world, to find those relationships, to find those connections, and to find those friendships, because they're, in a world of 7.6 billion people, nobody should ever feel alone in the world. So, yeah.
Well, Bradley, we are about to wrap up this podcast and head over to a live stream for the Dream Achiever series. Thank you so much for all that we've shared. I feel like we can have this conversation for another 2 hours, so I look forward to having you back on the podcast again here in the near future. How can our listeners reach out to you if they're interested in coaching? Do you have any programs coming up? And how can people get in touch with you?
GiantSmile.net, BradleyGroveHyson.com. You can find all of my contact info there. I love to work with people and coach. I'm excited to get the books out there. I'm excited now that the pandemic seems to be improving to do more speaking, which I think has been on a hiatus for some time. And
you have a workshop coming up?
This summer, I have a program that we've been doing for 6 years now called Earth Alive. And that's going to happen in Western Mass. I think if you're looking to really make a change in your life, a workshop and a retreat is a wonderful way. First of all, because it gets you outside of familiar environments. Second of all, it's an immersion experience that you're doing with other people that I think has a synergistic effect. And then that can usually be like a little, like setting off like an explosion that sort of churns the soil, and then, ongoing maintenance and ongoing care to direct all that energy, and what opens up for you when you do that.
Plus, there's this synergy of being with like-minded people. Sorry to talk over you.
No. Yeah, beautiful. Absolutely. Yeah. So and information on that's on my website.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bradley. This was such an awesome conversation. We're going to jump on over to the live stream here in about 12 minutes. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Oddcast, the podcast. We'll come to you again soon. Take care.
Thanks, Brian.